Welcome back, listeners, to our podcast. Today, Hannah is going to explore healthy and unhealthy relationships. So, Hannah, how come we're talking today about relationships?
Yeah, first of all, it's good to talk to you again, Eileen. Thank you so much for asking. We spoke about relationships also as one of the topics during our open space discussions of the young women that we hold monthly. And we all realized how important it is to be able to talk about it and to be able to reflect on relationships and have more knowledge. So we thought it would be good to have a podcast episode as well.
Okay, so what different types of relationships can we identify and what are their key characteristics?
So generally, we can identify healthy and unhealthy relationships. And then if we think about unhealthy relationships, we can find like different degrees of relationships, you might say. So very abusive, highly abusive, dangerous relationships, or let's say generally an unhealthy relationship that might not be as abusive as others. So there are different components or degrees to it, and different people define it a bit differently, but generally we speak about healthy and unhealthy relationships. And healthy relationships might hold as key characteristics aspects as being able to maintain an open and respectful communication, respectful behavior, mutual trust, and support in the relationships. Usually both should be quite happy being together and sharing time and being in the relationship. There's hopefully a basis of honesty and trust, equality, fairness, a shared decision-making process, an enjoyment of personal time, but also time spent together, and that both have a kind of equal component to it, or both should be present, and that both have a healthy self-esteem, that they're able to take care of themselves so that they're not unhealthily dependent on the partner and keep their, let's say, individuality and independence while they are in a supportive union where they become better together, but they are also able to be on their own and still function properly, for example. So they have secure attachment, feel safe in the relationship, comfortable, and there's probably a sense of playfulness, fondness, a sense of being valued by the other partner. And then, of course, also having healthy, consensual, satisfying intimacy, if it is an intimate relationship. It's hopefully a union that allows for growth, for learning, for positive change and positive own development, and that there's a healthy and fair conflict resolution, and hopefully both have also skills of emotion regulation and emotional intelligence. But yeah, nobody is perfect, but the idea that both are happy to grow with it, like while they are together, to have this exchange that makes them both develop into good directions and be the best version of themselves. So I would say these are key elements for a healthy relationship. Now, if we look at unhealthy relationship and then also abusive relationship, there's definitely a lack of communication. There might be very problematic situations of, for example, fights or avoidance. Those partners often attach in unhealthy ways, so unhealthy attachment is given. There might be a lack of trust, so more control, a lack of equality and unequal decision taking. So maybe one person might take more decisions and the other one adjusts to it, but neglects their own position, kind of. There's no sense of trust and safety. There might be a lot of disagreements, a lack of privacy probably. The intimacy might be less satisfying, and in really abusive relationship, like forced and abusive. Yeah, there might be an unequal control of resources or access to resources, and people might be in those relationships or stay in them for wrong reasons, as the fear of being alone or feelings of guilt, shame, self-blame, and like conflict can't really be worked out, so no proper conflict resolution skills are there. There's a lack of general healthy relationship skills from at least one side, if not both. So a lot of different aspects that come into play when it comes to unhealthy relationships. And then if these are abusive relationships, it might go even further. So there might be like really threatening, hurtful behavior. It might be even life-threatening to be in that relationship. There is probably constant control, criticism, manipulation, hostility, violence, as I mentioned. And this can be like really life-threatening, as I said, so there's no safety. Even leaving the relationship can put a partner into danger of their own lives. And there's for sure a toxic codependency, often trauma bonding. The ability to trust oneself might be lost, and so on. So yeah, a lot of aspects that come into place that are less pleasant to experience and to live with.
Okay, thank you. Well, could you talk a little bit more about what we understand about abuse?
Yeah, so generally we say there are 7 forms of abuse. We speak about physical, psychological, emotional, social, financial, digital, and sexual abuse. Depending on who's looking at it, these categories might also be formulated a bit differently or understood a bit differently. But let's say we talk about those 7 forms. And physical abuse, of course, includes pushing, throwing, kicking, hitting, punching, slapping, stabbing, shoving, beating, strangulation, and choking. So all kind of physical violence. Psychological abuse, there we see gaslighting, which is a very interesting phenomenon, but maybe not known to everybody. So that means a person tries to make another person question their own reality by gaslighting them. So I explain where the term comes from, maybe that's best. So it comes from a movie that was called Gaslight, and in the movie the main actress was living in an unhealthy relationship with a man who was trying to get kind of rid of her and get access to her wealth because she was very rich. So what he was doing is he changed the light bulbs in the house, and so that the rooms were like lit in different ways. And she mentioned this and she said, something is wrong with our light. And he said, no, you are going crazy, or you are mentally unstable. Look, you must go to a clinic, or you are not fine. The lights are everywhere the same. But what he did in reality, he did change the light bulbs just to kind of gaslight her in thinking that she was going mad and she was the problem. So that's where the term gaslighting was born.
That's fascinating.
It is very fascinating. So another example might be that a partner leaves their key all the time at the same spot, and now the other partner is moving it so that the person never finds the keys, and then the partner says, yeah, well, what's wrong with you? You never find your keys. Look at you. You are so lost. You can't keep your senses together, and so on. So it's a way of putting the other person down. So gaslighting is one aspect to it. Then there's, of course, also manipulation, control, surveillance. Then if we look at emotional abuse, there are verbal threats, name-calling, insults, constant criticism, humiliation, intimidation, stalking is part of it as well. Then isolation, excessive texting, calling, and kind of checking in. Or even the refusal of being in touch and abusing somebody emotionally by giving something and then withdrawing and not being in touch, or ignoring the other person. So it can go in both directions, but it's often very extreme. Then if we speak about social abuse, it means the control of social contacts, and for example the interdiction of certain social contacts. So maybe not being allowed to meet certain friends, or not being allowed to be in touch with their own family members, having a control over who a person is allowed to be in touch with and who they are not allowed to be in touch with. Then financial control, understands or includes all control of money. So, for example, control over bank accounts and the access to own bank cards, for example. Then financial exploitation, no access to the own money, and sometimes even no access to the own salary while the person is working and maybe even forced into unwanted employment, or on the other hand, being denied of employment and then not having access to money, maybe not even having access to their own social welfare payments, and maybe child benefit payments and so on. So control of the whole financial world. If we talk about digital abuse, this includes the control of technical devices and social media. So technical surveillance, posting of material, for example, on social media against the will of the other person or the threat of doing it. This might include intimate images or material. Then, of course, also constant calls, messages, voicemails in order to keep this control and constantly checking in again, which happens digitally. Cyberbullying is one part of it as well. And then there might be even the forced constant change of the own phone, the phone number, the apps and so on, so that the person has difficulty staying in touch with others because now there's maybe a new phone with new numbers and the person might not have access to the old phone with the old number. So it's a tricky situation. So some victims or people experiencing this can't even be reached because they might have every week a different number. And then if we speak about sexual abuse, this includes all unwanted sexual activity. So any pressured and coerced activity where consent is missing. So for example, sexual assault, sexual harassment, rape, attempted rape, unwanted exposure to sexually explicit material, also unwanted exposure or production of pornography, forced prostitution, sex trafficking, restricted access to birth control or safer sex methods, and also even the refusal of having sex, not as a natural way of not consenting, but of putting another person down, saying, well, you are not worth it or not attractive enough for me to be sexually intimate with you while they're actually in an intimate relationship. So there might be all different ways of how sexual abuse happens, but the main characteristic is consent is absent. So this is a real problem. And apart from that, you might have heard about it. In some countries, we speak about coercive control.
I'm hearing that a lot recently. Tell me, what is coercive control? What's it mean?
So basically, coercive control is a persistent pattern of controlling, coercive and threatening behavior. There's even a coercive control law now, for example, in Ireland and also the UK and some countries. Some countries don't have it yet, but it kind of captures the idea that a person lives under so much control and pressure that all aspects of their life is very profoundly impacted by it, so they can't live a free life. So maybe if they go to the grocery shop, they need to do it in a certain time frame. They might have to have their phone by themselves, like with themselves all the time, because somebody might call and they might not be able to take up employment and so on. So there is such an excessive control by the partner, even down to what the person is wearing or not, where the person is going or not, with whom they are spending time or not, what they are doing or not, that it becomes so life-defining that we then say there's coercive control. There are very good videos also available on YouTube, for example. One is coercive control, where's the line? And another one is hidden in plain sight, coercive control and domestic abuse, that I can recommend watching to get a better understanding of what this means. And as I said, in some countries, this is now even included into the legislation, so it's possible to report against coercive control.
Thanks, Hannah. And Hannah, what is the typical profile of an abuser?
Yeah, that's a good question. Generally, we can say that an abuser can be of any age, any gender, any race, any sexual orientation, any religion, any background, also educational background or financial background, social background. So it can be really anybody. Anybody can potentially be an abuser. And I think that's the very interesting part about this topic that I find fascinating, because it is a human problem. We can find it anywhere. It can happen to anybody. I think the interesting part is we can all be abusive at some stage in life. That doesn't necessarily make us an abuser. So for example, if I hit you by hazard now, and I say, oh gosh, sorry, I didn't mean to hit you, I'm sorry I hurt you, and you say it's okay, and I promise you not to repeat it, and I really don't, that means I was abusive towards you unintendedly, and I excuse myself and I make sure not to repeat it. So this is kind of a human experience we all have. We might do something to hurt somebody else and it's not really our intention, so we can try to change that. If it comes to somebody who is a real abuser and we define the person as such, it means there's a conscious choice behind those actions to be abusive. So it doesn't happen by hazard. It's some pattern of behavior. It's a choice, and the person becomes abusive. So as I said, it's interesting because it's across humanity. Anywhere where we go, we can find it, no matter what background. And oftentimes this person has low self-esteem and is very insecure in themselves, but might mask it up by appearing very confident, like outgoing maybe, or showing off. But in reality, there is a lot of hurt or brokenness inside, which gets masked up, and the person is unhealthily attaching to another, and they need the other person to kind of get this external validation or feeling in control, therefore this control. So I would say the saying is hurt people hurt. So often these are people who carry a lot of trauma, who were hurt a lot, but instead of healing, they choose to continue with the hurt and hurt others. So this can include strong mood swings, very explosive temper and anger. So it's unpredictable how they are going to react to the other person, which makes being with them very difficult. The person who's not abusive might feel like on edge and like walking on eggshells, because there might be very aggressive and dangerous behavior, which might include threats. For example, threatening to kill themselves or kill somebody else, like the other person, or maybe the children, so that the other person is obliged to do what they want. There's a lack of accountability for the own behavior and responsibility. So if something goes wrong, it's always the blame. Like they always blame somebody else. It's always the fault of somebody else. So being able to kind of show up as an adult and stand up and say, okay, I did something wrong, I'm going to repair this, that's not there. So there will be blame. There's a lack of accountability. Of course, the person might be abusive in all the different ways that we mentioned earlier. So emotional, verbal, physical, psychological, sexual, financial, social, and or digital abuse. Coercive control might be given. Often the victim is isolated from their social network so that they have the full control over them. Oftentimes this goes hand in hand with narcissism. So abusers are often narcissists, or at least display narcissistic behavior, and often have a lack of empathy, so can't really understand other people's experience or put themselves in their perspective and feel their pain or their emotions. So there's a lack of this, and there's usually a lack of emotional intelligence as well. I think kind of this gives a little insight into what an abuser or profile of an abuser can look like. This list could go on forever because it's very complex and we can find so many aspects that play into this. But I hope this gives a little bit of an insight for now.
No, that's really helpful. Hannah, can you tell me what are the tactics that an abuser might use?
Yeah, so we can identify 8 tactics of abuse that an abuser or also dominator, sometimes we speak of the dominator instead of the abuser, but it means the same, uses. So those 8 tactics, I will shortly name them and then I will explain. There's the sexual controller, the king of the castle, the bad father, the liar, the persuader, the head worker, the jailer, and the bully. So let's start with the bully. So it's somebody who bullies. We are probably all familiar with that. So somebody who might shout, smashes things, sulks, put another person down, and so on. So bullying behavior. Then we have the jailer. So that's somebody who stops the partner from seeing friends or other people, who might control what the person has to wear, who might define when the person is allowed to leave the house and otherwise make them stay inside the house, control where they are going, and where they are not allowed to go, and so on. So jailing the person. Then we have the head worker, so somebody who puts the other one down, who tells things like, let's say, says, you're too thin, you're too ugly, you're too fat, like always putting the other down by blaming, name calling, using very not so nice language towards the other person, to get into their head so that they believe it themselves. So they don't even need somebody from the outside to say it anymore, but they think that is what they are while they aren't. But it was worked so much in their head, let's say, or it was put
like
into
gaslighting, really.
It is exactly, yeah. Then we have the persuader, so somebody who threatens to kill themselves, the children, or the partner, who cries, who says, I love you, and that's why I do it. So, these wrong excuses. Threatens to report, for example, abuse that happens in the home to social services or so on, to just put pressure on the other person. Then we have the liar, so somebody who denies the abuse, who says it was only a slap, so downplays their own abusive behavior, instead of taking accountability and standing up for it and saying, yeah, I did something wrong. No, this doesn't happen here. So lies are used to mask this abusive behavior. And there's a lot of blaming. So if something happened, let's say an abusive situation where physical violence occurred, the person might blame the other person's behavior as provocative, or might say, it's the drink, it's the drugs, it's the stress, I'm overworked, and so on. So always blaming others. And using lies to get away with their behavior, or trying to get away. Then we have the bad father. So he calls, let's say, the partner, which might be the mother, a bad parent, turns the children against the other parent, so uses the children kind of as a manipulative tactic as well. Then, threatens to take the children away, to kill them, as I said earlier. Might persuade a person to have a baby and get pregnant, but then afterwards refuses to take care of the child, and so on. So all these ways of what we can think of what parents might do wrong, that goes basically into this category of bad father. In this case, we can also say bad parent, because women can be as abusive. Then we have the king of the castle, so somebody who treats you more like a servant or slave. So you, for example, they let something fall and they say, you pick it up, instead of picking it up themselves. So wanting to get everything. If it's the case of men, they might see women as women as those who have to provide sex, food, cleaning, kind of as a lady at home who does everything. Controls oftentimes the money, and doesn't really see equal housework, for example. And then the sexual controller, of course, mainly addressing in the category of sexual abuse. So probably rapes the other partner, won't accept no for an answer, doesn't care about consent, might reject pregnancies, like not wanting somebody to be pregnant, or might keep another person pregnant just so that they think they are not as attractive to others and keep them under their control. Might reject advances or force them, and so on. So this abusive behavior and regarding the intimacy. And just to clarify again, I often said now he, as if the abuser is a man towards oftentimes a woman. Like statistically seen, we have way more abusers being male and abusing their female partners, but of course it can happen in all different directions. As I said earlier, an abuser can be anybody, so it can also be from the woman, a female partner, towards the male partner, or in same-sex relationships, from one partner to the other. So it can be in all directions. So good.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. We often hear about the cycle of abuse. Can you explain this?
Yes, the cycle of abuse is quite a common and often used theory, we could say. There are critics about it because some people say it doesn't apply always, but it's good to know about it. So we speak here of the explosion, like an explosion happens, the explosion phase, then the honeymoon phase, and then the tension building phase. So let's start with the explosion. Let's say an escalation happens. So maybe a strong physical, like an event of physical violence. But it might not even be. It might also be something like throwing a plate next to a person, or slamming the door very strongly, or giving a person the silent treatment, name calling, swearing, something, or as I said, even hitting in a physical way. So an explosion happened, an escalation, and then afterwards the honeymoon phase comes. So the apologies, the more respectful, more attentive behavior, the promises to change, to improve the communication, and maybe gifts are given to excuse themselves for the wrong behavior that happened before, compliments are made, and maybe more nice time is spent together. And the person that was at the receiving end of the abusive incident might think, oh, wow, the person has changed. He's taking accountability, he or she, there's an excuse, there are gifts, there's a making up for it, we are repairing conflict. But it might not be. It might all be a strategy to, keep the person believing it, but not really doing it. So then after the honeymoon phase, there's again the tension building phase. So maybe insults coming in, again threats, sarcasm, jealousy, accusations, again controlling behavior, quick mood changes, emotional distress, and so on. So the tension leads up again to a next explosion, to a next incident, which then is often followed again by excuses and so on by the honeymoon phase. But here that's the difference that I tried to explain earlier. If a non-abusive person happens to be abusive, if they excuse themselves and they promise not to do it again and to change, they do it, and you can see a change in their behavior and they are really sorry. An abusive person will say they are sorry and they will promise change, but they don't change. So it happens again and again and again. So that's why we speak about the cycle of abuse. But as I said, there are different ways of looking at this model, because these cycles, if somebody experiences cycles, might happen in different time intervals. So let's say at the beginning of the relationship, it might happen in a 6-month cycle. And the longer the relationship goes on, it might be weekly. Others say it's a constant thing. There's no cycle. Like you're in a constant threat moment, or like one explosion after the other. So there's not even a real cycle. So this idea is good, or this model is good to know about, but it doesn't apply to every situation. Others might say, I never really experienced a cycle, but it was a highly unhealthy and abusive relationship. So yeah, we can look at it out of different experiences that might say, yeah, it's like this model, and others might say, no, it was a bit different. But overall, it's good to know that if there is a cycle, as I explained, and especially if the honeymoon phase happens, for somebody to question this and to say, is this person really going to change, and do they really mean what they say, or are they just saying it to keep me on track or stay, but then something worse might happen next time. So yeah, it's good to be aware of this.
It's so stressful.
It is very stressful, yeah.
So Hannah, isn't this all about power and control?
Yes, you're right. It's all about power and control. So the abusive person is kind of addicted to being in power and having the control. So sometimes we might wonder, how come that a partner would rape an intimate partner? That makes no sense. But it's not about, let's say, the sexual gratification or the sexual pleasure. It's about gaining control and power over the other person. So there's often, or actually always, an element of power and control here. And to sum this up again, we can look at basically all the forms of abuse out of this perspective. So emotional abuse, economic abuse, physical abuse and so on happens to gain power and control. The intimidation, the coercion, the threats, using the children against the other person, the minimizing, denying and blaming, the isolation and so on. So it's all ways of gaining power and control. And in cases of male abusers, there also comes the male privilege into place, using this being like already in society in a maybe advanced position due to gender, and using that again to gain power and control over another person.
Okay, so having spoken a lot about abusive relationships, Hannah,
Yes.
What does a healthy relationship look like?
I think that's a very important question, because it is so good to know about unhealthy abusive relationships, but it's also really good to talk about healthy relationships and being aware of what does that entail, and also maybe asking ourselves, am I able to be a healthy partner, or are there aspects I could work on so that I reduce my own unhealthy behavior to become a healthy partner, and being able to start, develop and maintain healthy relationships. So in general, we talked about the dominator and the 8 tactics of abuse. We can also speak about the counterponent, which means the friend, and the 8 aspects that come into play here. And if we speak about the friend, we speak about a decent human being that can become a healthy partner. So if we talk about the friend, we say there's the lover, the partner, the good father, the truth teller, the negotiator, the confidence booster, the liberator and the friend. Starting with the friend, so that's somebody who talks to you, who listens, who's a companion, who has a sense of humor, is cheerful, and somebody that's like nice to spend time with. Somebody we look forward to meeting, we trust to have a conversation with, we can have deep conversations with in meaningful exchange and so on. Then the liberator is somebody who welcomes the other partner's family and friends, for example, is happy to meet them, encourages interests and activities and social contacts outside of their own relationship, and also, like, for example, encourages professional development, the acquirement of new skills at work or at college and so on. So it's really somebody who's empowering the other person and encouraging this shared process of growth. Then the confidence booster is somebody who gives positive compliments, who might say, wow, you look really good, or you kind of, you spread such a positive energy and so on. So like just nice feedback, who values the other person's opinions, who supports ambitions, who encourages trying something new, says, well, you're very competent, it's great to go into this direction and try it, and who values the other person. Then the negotiator is somebody who's able to take responsibility and be responsible for their own well-being and happiness. So not somebody who blames the other person and wants them to be responsible for their own well-being and happiness, but no, is somebody who can look after themselves, who's independent, who has healthy self-esteem in themselves and takes responsibility and is well on their own and happy, and who behaves as a reasonable human being. So that means they can take accountability for their own behavior, they can take accountability if they mess up and repair conflict in healthy ways, and they say what they mean. So there's an integrity. Actions and words actually match. There's no mismatch of them. So if somebody says, I'm going to do this, they're going to do it. And they're not just saying it to kind of manipulate another person. Then there's the truth teller. So as I said, they accept the responsibility and they admit to being wrong. So I just explained it. So we say also truth teller to it. And then the good father, or let's say the good parent in general, is a responsible parent, an equal parent that supports dealing with the children, have conversations about how do we want to raise children together in healthy ways, in ways that make the children feel safe and flourish and be nourished and so on. So just responsible, good shared parenting. So then we speak about the partner, which is somebody who shares housework, who shares financial responsibility, who treats the other as an equal, who steps up where needed, but can also maybe take themselves back where needed. It's a real partnership. And then the lover is somebody who shows physical affection, and this even without that it has to lead to any sexual activity. It can lead to it, but it's also generally appreciative and physically affective without any back thoughts. Is somebody who accepts the right to say no to sex, is happy to share responsibility for contraception, think about safer sex methods, is very aware of consent and practices it and brings it into the everyday life. So a person that would be lovely to be with, let's say.
Absolutely, and it seems to be about equality and respect, doesn't it?
Exactly, that puts it down. So we can say characteristics of a balanced, healthy relationships include equality, respect, trust and support, honesty and accountability, responsible parenting for the case there are children, shared responsibility, an economic partnership, negotiation and fairness, and non-threatening but safe behavior and comforting behavior.
Okay. So Hannah, if we're in a relationship, how can we evaluate how healthy that relationship is? Is there any tools there to help us?
Yes, so generally, if you are just listening to this podcast and you recognize certain aspects in a relationship you might have that doesn't seem right or are identified now as unhealthy, I would say it's good to take this on board. It's always possible to Google, for example, domestic abuse services or any other services around relationships. They often have on their websites quizzes with questions that you can answer. There might be questions as, do you feel safe in your relationship? And you answer with yes or no. And if you answer all these questions, you might come to the conclusion to say, oh, actually my relationship might hold a lot of aspects that are unhealthy, and maybe I can repair this with my partner and get support and work on having a better relationship, maybe through therapy or a mediator. But if we recognize it's a really like an abusive relationship, then I would say it's good to recognize it and to act upon it. But there are a lot of relationship evaluations available also online. If it's not through some websites and quizzes, these might be some papers and sheets that can be found where different questions are asked as well, just to evaluate the own position in the relationship, the feelings around it, and the relationship in its wholesome.
Okay, so if somebody realizes the relationship is unhealthy, what do they do? Where do they go from there?
I would say in most countries by now there are helplines available from either for example, a domestic abuse support service. There's women's aid in many countries or men's aid. I would ring the helpline and discuss those questions and say, oh, I observed this and that. Is that healthy? What should I do with this? And if there's a clear answer already that the relationship is abusive, probably quite unsafe, maybe even dangerous, it's important to get the right professional support. Reach out again through the helpline or maybe through a website, a web chat, an email, a text message, whatever method is available to you, or maybe even present at the door of some service and say, I'm experiencing this and that, what support can I get? Maybe go to a women's refuge to physically exit this relationship and find safety. There are orders that can be applied for, like safety, protection, and barring order and interims orders, to get this support by the system we have in place. So I would always say reach out for support, consider exiting the relationship, and if so, how to do so safely. And then on the other hand, as I said, if the relationship isn't like highly abusive or very unhealthy, but has aspects that could be worked on and improved, but the relationship itself might not be totally wrong, then I would always say also to reach out for support and go to partner counseling, therapy, and say there are some aspects maybe in the communication that could be improved. How do we learn to communicate in healthy, respectful ways with each other, to learn to express our own thoughts? I think in general the issue in our society is we encourage people to be in relationships and, for example, to get married without teaching anybody how to have a healthy relationship, how to have a successful marriage, how to learn and develop healthy in general healthy relationship skills, but also healthy romantic relationship skills. So that's an issue we all face, that we learn and we go to school and we go to college and we learn about so many things, and we might be an engineer and we become this and that's great. But relationships are so fundamental to human existence, and we pay way too little attention to what kind of relationships do we have and how do we have healthy ones. So I would say it's always good to reflect on oneself as well, and to develop personally, that in general. But as I said, if somebody recognizes to be in an unhealthy relationship, always get help, always reach out, and if possible, get out of the relationship. And yes, there are different ways to do so, but I would say it's always good to have somebody on this journey towards freedom and towards new, better, healthy relationships.
I suppose what you're saying is to realise you're not alone. You're not the first person to go through this, and there is help there.
Yes.
But you have to reach out.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
And I mean, maybe even if, like, it could be also to talk first to a friend or family member or neighbor or anybody in the social network that seems trustworthy, maybe a bit experienced, and go and ask what to do. Yeah, but it's always good to talk and to reach out and get the support, yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, Hannah, for that. That was really informative. And listeners, we look forward to talking to you next time.